Welcome to this webinar. We will give it like 1 or 2 minutes to see whether we get more people to join. Then we can get started. So I think it's time for us to get started. So hello everyone, and depending on where you are, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. This is our first webinar for the platform, and it's a series of webinars because we are going to have them on a monthly basis. And it's a nice way for us to get started as we get prepared for the next, for the upcoming COP16 for both CBD and CCD. So I start with the rules of engagement for us to make sure that we know who is who. So if you can be able to introduce yourself in your chat, just sharing with us your name and maybe with the organization that you work for. Stay unmute until you ask for the floor, and you can unmute yourself when we give you the floor. If you have any question or comment, please put it in your chat. And really, we invite you to engage a lot in the chat and the Q&A because it will be useful for the general discussion. And we will be recording the webinar, and we hope that we have your consent. There will be a need if you want to share your feedback. You will have the email of Vanessa with whom you can share the feedback. So we have a slight busy agenda for now, but I think we can make it. So after this brief intro of mine, probably I will introduce you to the two speakers that we have with Matea, who works for as a program officer for the United Nations Environmental Program for the World Conservation and Monitoring Center. She will be entertaining us about the global biodiversity framework, the need for indicators, and also telling us what's really needed in terms of the capacity of the countries, which could be an opportunity for CGIAR and cross partners, and how that is relevant with the the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. After a presentation of 15 minutes, we will have a brief slide that will be introduced to us by Christine. And then we will move on with the next presentation by Adisha, who works for the International Rice Research Institute, and who will be sharing with us his expertise in the area of economics of land degradation and neutrality. And he has experience working with the IPCC reports, and he will be zooming mainly into really his expertise for the synergies between land, climate, and biodiversity. So that will be mainly how we are going to move on. And I don't want to eat too much of the time. I will just hand over the floor to Matteo. You have 15 minutes to share with us your experience, and I really want to thank you for creating the time for us.
Okay, thanks so much, Gargel, and hello, everyone. I'm just gonna... I can share my screen, right? This will stop sharing someone else's screen, it says. Okay. Can you see this? Is it okay? Yeah? Okay, great. Hi, everyone, again. My name is Matea, and I'm a program officer in the policy team in UNEP WCMC, and I mainly work on the biodiversity indicators, more especially on the indicators adopted in the monitoring framework. All right. I stop sharing right now. Is it changing slides? No. Let me try. Let's start then. Okay, you see this now? Okay, great.
Yes.
That's good, great, thank you so much. So just for a little bit of introduction to start with, as we know, at the 50th meeting of the Conference of Parties under the Convention of Biological Diversity, they adopted the Global Biodiversity Framework, which actually sets out an ambitious pathway to reach the global vision of world living in harmony with nature by 2050. And among that framework, we have key elements, which are 4 goals for 2050 and 23 targets for 2030. And to monitor the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, COP15 and the CBD adopted the monitoring framework and its decision 15/5. And monitoring framework contains different types of indicators to measure the implementation. So we have first headline indicators, which are a minimum set of high-level indicators. They aim to capture the overall scope of the goals and targets. So not every element from the goals and targets, but overall sense of what it is. And these indicators are to be used by parties for planning and tracking progress. There are a total of 26 headline indicators in the monitoring framework. Then we have binary indicators. They're derived from a set of questions answered by parties' focal points. They're aimed at understanding the progress made towards implementing measures to deliver the ambition of the framework. And then we also have component and complementary indicators. So countries can use these optional indicators together with headline indicators to cover other elements of the goals and targets and get into more in-depth analysis. Just to say also that the monitoring framework can be supplemented by other national and subnational indicators. So at COP15, also, because I said the indicators adopted in the framework are at various levels of readiness. So the monitoring framework contains some indicators that require further work for us to be able to uptake and use at national level. So to further operationalize and provide technical advice on these unresolved issues regarding to the monitoring framework, parties to the CBD establish an ad hoc technical expert group of indicators, which has a mandate until COP16. And at the request of this technical expert group, to support their work, UNFWCMC prepared an online capacity needs assessment survey. And this is on the needs of parties to use, produce, and compile the headline indicators of the monitoring framework. So you can see the survey was distributed to parties through the CBD notification in February 2024. And the results here are based on responses provided by us by mid-April. So you can see in total, we have 44 parties responded to the survey, which is a relatively small sample of countries. That's why these findings are present today should be seen as indication of the main needs, gaps, and priorities identified parties. Just as a side note that, as I previously mentioned, the methodologies for headline indicators vary in degrees of development. So we have indicators in the framework that are established, methods are established, they're used in almost every country, compared to some indicators that methods are not developed. Process needs to be set up to establish those, or we need another additional institution organization to actually take upon the development of the indicator. So, okay, so what did we ask the parties? So for each headline indicator, the first question posed was, is there a national institution with responsibility for reporting on this indicator? We asked questions specifically for headline indicators, or those are the indicators that party will need to use for planning and reporting purposes. Okay, and then the results. What we found is that across all headline indicators, the proportion of parties that are aware of national institutions responsible for reporting on each headline indicator varies. So on the bottom, we have headline indicators for 4 goals and 23 targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And then on top, we have a number of responses per party to answer individual questions for each headline indicator. Apologies, I couldn't put all the names of the indicators in the in the bottom because they're quite long. So hopefully you remember the names of the indicator, but feel free to ask if you don't. So I said, so the responses vary. So on average, 53% of parties consider there is a national institution in country responsible for reporting on a given headline indicator. And parties are more aware of national institutions that can compile report on headline indicators for indicators with established methodology. So 63% compares to those without an established methodology, it's 43%. And this is not surprising since the indicators with the lowest proportion of parties saying yes, there is a national institution are indicators D.3, 9.2, 50.1, 18.2. So indicators is still required further work. And greatest of parties responding yes, there is a national institution is for indicators 3.1, SDG indicators 10.1, 10.2, 8.3. So this is the red list index. So the next question was, okay, if parties responded yes to having a national institution with responsibility of reporting, then we asked whether those specific headline indicators are compiled in a national database. So also the proportion of parties compiling in a national database varies. So across all headline indicators, we have an average of 39% of parties compile the indicators in a national database. Parties are also able to compile these headline indicators in databases for those, again, for the established methodology, 45% compares to indicators without an established methodology, that is 34%. And then parties that could not identify a national institution responsible for reporting on a headline indicator, we were then asked to what is their expected timeline by which they will be able to produce these headline indicators. And we have short term, which means 1 to 2 years. This is to align with the submissions of the 7th National Report to the CBD. Then we have medium term, 3 to 5 years. This is to align with the submissions of the 8th National Report in 2029. But parties could also indicate an ability to produce the indicator short term, medium term, also whatever this indicator is not applicable to their situation. So very few parties will be able to produce headline indicators in the short term, so only 14%. The indicators which parties are more likely to produce in the short term are, again, the ones focused around goal A, so 8.2. Then we have 2.2, which is indicator on restoration, 8.1, red list of ecosystems. And then most parties will be able to produce headline indicators in the medium term. And headline indicators which parties are more likely to produce in this medium term, as we see, is 1.1 on spatial planning, 12.1, which is an SDG indicator, is 7.2. Several parties will be unable to produce the indicator either in the short term or the medium term, so 25% of parties. And the reasons given behind that were lack of agreed up-to-date methodology on the specific headline indicator, lack of available data, lack of human or technical capacity, lack of political will, or lack of financial support. And then we also asked, does your country need assistance with compiling and reporting on this headline indicator? And then we see the proportion of parties requiring assistance for the production and compiling of this headline indicator also varies. So across all headline indicators, average is 64% of parties responded they need assistance for producing, compiling a headline indicator. And parties require more support on headline indicators without an established methodology, so almost 70% compares to those with an established methodology. And then when parties reported yes to requiring assistance for production and compilation of the headline indicators at the national level, we then asked what type of assistance would they require. So the most frequent reported support required is training on the methodology for compiling the indicator at the national level. The second most frequent one is the data collection. Then we have third one is assistance analyzing the indicator, and then party respondent less support for institutional coordination on data reporting. And at the end, final question was about financial resources available to produce these headline indicators. So the availability of financial resources for the production and compilation of headline indicators at the national level varies quite a lot across the headline indicators. So most parties have insufficient financial resources to produce and compile headline indicators at the national level. So on average, 34% of parties expressing having no financial resources available at the national level. 23 expressed that the financial resources are far from sufficient, and another 24 expressed that financial resources are available but not quite sufficient. And we can see only 19% of parties express having sufficient financial resources available. So in terms of key messages, so there are headline indicators for which parties indicate there is sufficient national capacity. Overall, these indicators either have an established methodology and an institution with a mandate to develop a calculated indicator based on collected data and regularly update the indicators, such as the indicator 3.1 on protected areas. Additionally, many are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, are therefore likely to have received support from capacity development initiatives. Many parties only indicated capacity gaps in producing some headline indicators. This is particularly true for those indicators for which methodology is in development and for which there's no established data collection mechanisms. So since the time of the survey, I just wanted to say that the ad hoc technical expert group of indicators has produced updated guidance on the headline indicators, which is now available on the CBD website for Substa 26. So there has been some development since the time of the survey on certain headline indicators, but still we need to note that many of the headline indicators still require further work. And this is something that's also described in the active recommendation to Substa 26. At the end, I'm just going to go over some UNEP WCMC selected tools and resources to actually support the effective implementation and monitoring of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So our current focus is in this National Monitoring Support Initiative is to mobilize a global network of practitioners and to support the enhancement of national monitoring systems to actually support monitoring, reporting, and review of implementation of the GBF. So this is a 7-year initiative, so from 2023 to 2030, and we will develop these inclusive, collaborative, climate-relevant approaches to develop and enhance national biodiversity systems for data collection and management. So this initiative will also identify capacity, financial resources required to develop and maintain such systems, and this will drive the transition from the previous global approaches to monitoring diversity to a bottom-up country-driven approach that will ensure engagement and ownership of data and monitoring systems. And just 3 online really useful resources. So UNEP WCMC also holds the Secretariat to the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, and this is a global initiative to promote and coordinate the development and delivery of biodiversity indicators. The work of the BIP is mandated, I think, with more than 20 CBD COP decisions. So it promotes over 80 global scale indicators and includes over 70 partners. Then we have GBF indicators in the bottom left. So it provides information and form metadata for the adopted headline indicators in the monitoring framework. So specifically metadata has been provided by indicator producers, and metadata includes information about indicator availability, methodology, time series, any gaps, possible disaggregation. And then we have on the bottom right is the target tracker. So we have been developing a target tracker, which is an online tool that uses the headline indicators of the monitoring framework to visualize these progress towards each goal and target of the global diversity frameworks. So it shows progress towards the GBF by using headline indicators aggregated from national data where possible, but also progress towards national targets using national collated data. And as the last slide, so UNEP WCMC also is an implementing partner in a UNEP UNDP-led project of the Global Environmental Facility. And this is to support countries in updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, so NBSAPs, in line with the Global Biodiversity Framework. And part of this project is to help countries develop national monitoring systems. And we are leading the development of guidance materials, tools, on the monitoring framework to support this establishment and improve the national monitoring system. And this guidance, I think, will be available really soon. I'm happy to share the links. Hopefully that wasn't over 15 minutes. I think this is my last slide.
Thank you very much, Mattea. Really highly appreciated for sharing. I will just open the floor to Christine for the Slido.
Thank you so much, Matea, for your presentation and for sharing all about how this relates to GBF. Vanessa, are you able to share the Slido, please?
Yes.
Yeah, so if everyone could join the Slido, that would be great. We just have a question so that you can reflect on what Matea just presented on and how you can use the information she shared for yourself, for your own organization, and what work you guys are doing. So the question is, in what areas can you contribute in terms of working with countries strengthening capacity needs? So join the Slido using the number 3511164 or by scanning the QR code. And we'll just give another minute to wait for responses.
We'll continue with the slide, and thanks, Christine, and we can hand over to Alisha for his presentation to share with us his expertise and experience with the land degradation neutrality. The floor is yours, Alisha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kargele, for this word and for this opportunity to speak during the webinar of the Environment and Biodiversity Impact Platform. Today, I will talk about our work on economics of harmonizing land restoration activities across the Rio Conventions, so the 3 Rio Conventions, but also trying to link it to global biodiversity framework. This work has been done together with many organizations, University of Bonn, Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Resources of Rwanda, UWI, Economics of Land Degradation Initiative Secretariat, which is hosted at GIZ, which supported this initiative, and also Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. As we know, these 3 conventions have one thing in common, which is among the important elements that they have in common is land. And land restoration is a solution for land degradation, of course, for biodiversity loss, for climate change, for food insecurity and malnutrition. So that's why this is at the heart of the CBD, UNCCD, and climate change conventions action agendas. And from that perspective, there are significant synergies from joint programming and implementation of land restoration activities across the 3 conventions. If you look at the global biodiversity framework, we can see that many targets, in particular target 1, 2, 3, they have specific focus on land, on restoring land, on conservation of land, on sustainable management of land, especially if we are looking also at target 10 and 11. But of course, in addition to these targets, many other targets also have indirect links to land management, land conservation, sustainable management, land restoration. So in order to look at the economics of synergies of integrated approaches across the Rio Convention's implementation agendas, we used Rwanda as a case study. But now we are also continuing this work, looking into Central Asia. But today I will talk about Rwanda because this is where we already completed the study. Our underlying research questions were, A, find out extent and cost of land degradation, and what are the financing needs and gaps for land restoration, sustainable land management in Rwanda, but also identify most profitable locations for land restoration, cost effectiveness of prevention versus restoration, And importantly for our discussion today, economic comparison of segmented, so isolated versus coordinated land restoration across these different tracks, three different tracks. And based on that, come up with policy recommendations. You can also scan this QR code and then get the full paper underlying this study. When we look at the Rio Conventions, there is extensive legal basis mandating harmonized and well-coordinated implementation across the three Rio Conventions. And there are also, even at the level of UN General Assembly, there are, we found at least a dozen decisions mandating this collaborative implementation by UN General Assembly, by decisions of the COPs of the conventions. And in fact, a joint liaison group to enable this kind of harmonization was established quite some time ago, 2 decades ago. Of course, now we are talking a lot about synergies. So this has become a term which is often used in various debates and discussions. But we need to define in some way for this research what are synergies and trade-offs. For us, synergies are very specific. They need to mean two things. Synergies need to increase effectiveness, or they need to increase efficiency. So increasing effectiveness means collaboration would need to help to restore or sustainably manage or conserve more hectares of land than when working separately. And increasing efficiency means collaboration needs to help to restore each hectare of land at a lower cost. So this kind of definition of synergy, I think, is quite very measurable, and then very, very can be applied in a way that in a very, very concrete way. So in terms of trade-offs, what trade-offs are the promotion of one objective may result in negative impacts in terms of achievement of other objectives. So when we look at Rwanda and Rwanda's land restoration area targets, these are under LDN, land degradation neutrality, nationally determined contribution, bond challenge, and also there are some indications in terms of relative share, like under the MBSAPs, at least 10% of national territory holding biodiversity ecosystem services is protected, this kind of objective. So when we sum up the quantified objectives, targets, we reach 3.87 million hectares. The total area of Rwanda is 2.6 million hectares. So actually, when you add up these commitments, they are significantly larger than the total territory of Rwanda. What does it mean? It means that by definition, these land restoration area targets are not separate. They are overlapping. That's why it's already calls for harmonized implementation of these action agendas. If you look deeper into the text of these action plans in Rwanda, you can see very strong and obvious overlaps. So in this heat map on the left side, you can see that, of course, all of these three conventions, they have conservation dimension, sustainable land management dimension, restoration dimension. Of course, depending on the convention's focus, for example, a CBD prioritizes slightly more conservation, UNCCD prioritizes slightly more sustainable land management, Climate Change Convention prioritizes slightly more restoration, but then there are overlaps, as you can see also in this Venn diagram. This is another reason for harmonized and integrated approach for land restoration activities. So when we are approaching this study, these research questions I talked about, our economic approach, analytical approach, is based on total economic value framework, which tries to evaluate all land ecosystem services, and based on that, identify the land degradation and land restoration potentials. So we look at two types of land degradation. When land degradation happened through land use and land cover change, for example, when forest trees were cut down and then it became now a rangeland, so it's a land use change, or when land use did not change, but the quality of land deteriorated. For example, croplands, because of soil erosion, their fertility is going down, and then it's resulting in economic losses. So, and then we also did simulation modeling of transaction costs to identify synergies across the land restoration activities. I will talk a bit more in detail about this in the following slides. So we used several types of data sources. Of course, one source of data is remotely sent satellite data from the MODIS satellite on land use and land cover change. So this allows, in the case of Rwanda, to look at every 10 to 15 hectares of rectangle area, so pixels, and observe these land use changes at every of these 10, 15 hectares. In addition to that, we use economic values of ecosystem services coming from ESVD database. So this is economic services valuation database currently containing about 10,000 valuations, observations of ecosystem services value from all around the world. We also added other data sets, for example, economics of land degradation data sets from University of Bonn, and also we additionally compiled new data. Cost of land restoration actions data also comes from Econ-WOCAT data set. So this is a world overview of conservation agricultural technologies database subset, which has a harmonized set of technology, cost of technology, land restoration technologies with comparable economic costs. So erosion data comes from EUCN, Rwanda Water Board publication, and then carbon data from Spon and Gibbs, and transaction costs through our own data compilations. So if you compare 2001 and 2020, so this is our period of analysis of what were observed land use changes. You can see that big land use changes happened in savannas. There was decrease in savannas and grasslands. There was slight decreases in croplands without trees. But then there was a very strong increase in agroforestry systems. So croplands and other land uses with trees, particularly croplands. So when we take these into account and identify the degraded areas in Rwanda, we find that the total annual investment need to achieve all the identified restoration targets, restore degraded areas, is about $300 million if we want to restore them until 2030, in the next 7 years. And then we can also provide this kind of more detailed picture of where this land degradation needs are, how much does it cost at every pixel of 10 hectares, and at every pixel, at every location, what are the costs and benefits? So what is the return from every dollar invested into land restoration? We can also look at this from the carbon sequestration potential dimension, from the NDC's dimension. So we can see that restoring those degraded lands will result in carbon sequestration. For example, it's particularly obvious for restoring those degraded forests, but also agroforestry systems. So in agroforestry systems in Rwanda, perhaps per unit per hectare, carbon sequestration potential is not as high as in forests, but their overall area is much bigger. So as a result, we can see that there are comparable sequestration potentials as in forests. This restoration, of course, there are a lot of synergies. We will talk about that from common approach to restoration. But also restoration itself may result in certain trade-offs as well. And those trade-offs are in particularly salient when we are comparing food production versus carbon or versus biodiversity. And here we mapped those areas where those land restoration activities will lead to prioritizing food or where they would lead to prioritizing carbon based on their economic profitability. So when we look a little bit deeper into these restoration costs, there are major three types of restoration costs. Establishment costs, so when we want to plant the tree, baby tree, and then in Rwanda, this is or some other measures when you want to plant grasses, when you want to do terraces. So these establishment cost capital investments range from about $200 to $1,500 per hectare. And then there are maintenance costs, annual recurring costs, $137 per hectare. So when you, after planting a baby tree, we need to take care of that tree for some time so that it can survive. So this part of costs are well known, relatively well known. What is hidden is usually transaction costs. All those costs which enable the restoration programs, initiatives to actually happen. These are research, information, design, implementation, funding, mobilization, support, and many others. So all these transaction elements. In terms of achieving those synergies we were talking about, increasing efficiency, establishing costs, we cannot do much. One tree cost, okay, we can do a bigger nursery, but still there is not much we can do in terms of strong efficiency gains there, in my view. Maintenance costs involve labor costs, so it's also not much margin there. The biggest margin for efficiency gains is by reducing transaction costs, by which I don't mean we don't need research or information. That's essential, or you don't need administration. That's essential. What we need to do is collaborating on those areas will enable to increase the effectiveness of efficiency of our restoration activities. When we look at the data actually, and we look at these different types of transaction costs, their share in the total cost, we can see that in Rwanda, they represent about 25% of the total implementation costs. So total land restoration costs, sustainable land management costs, about 25% goes to transaction costs. And if you ask me at a global level, this is a very efficient way of implementing restoration. And then you can see this division by different types. Biggest, of course, is monitoring and enforcement, MRE, monitoring, reporting, and verification and enforcement. So after conducting these expert interviews, choice modeling, and modeling simulations, we came up with these 5 scenarios for joint implementation of the 3 Rio conventions identified by partners, experts in Rwanda. One is joint interagency working group for land restoration, so which will coordinate land restoration activities. Information exchange platform website. 3 is joint monitoring and evaluation system. 4, joint funding mobilization. 5, joint research and capacity building. So when we run the scenarios, looking into these different transaction costs, and then what would be the difference when there is collaboration between the 3 Rio Conventions implementation agendas, and or when they are implemented completely separately, then we can find that about $45 million could be gained by working together. We can also see this a little bit more clearly, perhaps, in this figure. Biggest efficiency gains are from joint action on monitoring and evaluation. Yeah. So by coordinated approach increases effectiveness and efficiency of implementing LDN, MBSAP, and NDC land-focused activities by about 15%. So that translates to $45 million in Rwanda. Does it mean that by coordinating these land restoration programs, will be getting less funding? Not at all, just the opposite. More efficient land restoration is more attractive for public and private investments. More than 70% of land restoration funding in Rwanda is coming from the government budget. So more effectiveness means that there is more efficient use of that public money. So in conclusion, what are the key takeaways for synergies actions across the Rio Convention? Number 1, it's very important to have joint spatial mapping of the land conservation, SLM, and restoration across the Rio Conventions. Now we have targets, quantified targets in some cases, but we don't know where those targets are exactly. I know that now LDN target setting process now in the 2nd stage, they are actually moving in that direction of spatial mapping. And also we saw target number 1 in global biodiversity framework calls for such spatial mapping. And that's where there is strong potential for collaboration and synergies. Second area is a joint monitoring and evaluation system, tracking the achievement of MBSEP, LD, and NDC land targets. I know that UN land degradation, land restoration decade has a system, is trying to come up with monitoring evaluation system, but that system is quite broad. There's many different indicators. So what is needed for these three conventions is to have joint monitoring evaluation system that can help them to track their land restoration targets. And of course, harmonized national action plans need to be done at the national level. So these three conventions implementation is at the national level. So there is a need for support from the Rio Conventions for coming up with this kind of joint national action plans for land conservation, SLM, and land restoration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Arish. And definitely this is a critical thing. As we know, the discussions for COP16 being CBD or CCD will be dominated by the discussion about the integration of the three Rio conventions, and economics aspects is one of the key things that countries are considering. So we will come back to this during the Q&A. I do believe you will get a few couple of questions about it. Before then, let me invite Gina to run the next slide. We will have 3 minutes for it. Gina, please.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much, Alicia, for that presentation on synergies of land, climate, biodiversity actions and how this is linked to the global biodiversity framework. Just like we did in the last Slido session, we would like to get your reflections and your thoughts about this particular session, right? And the question we have is, what could be additional considerations for biodiversity which are relevant for climate resilience? You can just quickly scan the QR code that is showing on the screen right now, or you can just join Slido directly using the codes 351164 so that we can get your responses. Okay, so I can see some responses coming in. Soil biodiversity from micro to macro level. Thank you. We also have environmental flows and economics of them. So thank you. Just keep your responses coming in. After the session, we will be sharing all the responses that we've received so far so that you can continue to reflect on them and you can continue to think through what we've heard here today from the speakers.
Thank you, Gina, and thanks for colleagues continue interacting with us with the slide. Now is the time to open for the Q&A. We have something like 12 minutes for lead. And to get started, I see one in the Q&A. And since we don't have many of a long list of them, I'll invite Matthew to ask the question loudly. Thanks. Hi, Matthew, in case you can hear me.
Yes, sorry, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, not great.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah, just a question to Aisha. I wondered whether in terms of trade-offs, when you're thinking about trade-offs of the different types of interventions, you always were talking about land, but I wonder if you think about the implications for water of various different types of interventions, because of course there can be interventions, well, most interventions on land have implications for water, And so I just wondered whether that was taken into account. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. This is, I think, a great question. Because there are two sides to this issue. In both sides, water is not that prominent. One side on the benefit side. So yes, ecosystem services, there are services associated with water provision, but these are on benefit sides when we are able to restore or to maintain or conserve the ecosystems. So in that part, there is some water element coming. In terms of the cost of action part, these costs usually, what we have now information about is labor costs, material costs, those transaction costs. But then water, the water is also a very important element to achieve that restoration. So in many areas, especially in perhaps not as much so in Rwanda, but across the Sahel region, when there is this Great Green Wall program now being implemented, water is one of the important bottlenecks for the successful implementation of that program. So water, this cost, unfortunately, we don't have much information in terms of what are the water costs, at least in Rwanda. But I think this is a great question. In Central Asia, where we are working now, it's a lot bigger issue, water availability, water issues. Perhaps this is something that we need to look into that. So far, water is not that much integrated, not only in this study, but also broadly, I think, in most of economics of land restoration field, water does not yet feature prominently, and this needs to be corrected. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that final point about definitely making it more prominent. So thanks very much. Good point.
Great, thanks both Matthew and Alicia for the reply. And we have the next one. And again, I will invite Moni to voice it loudly. Moni, in case you can hear me and you are not muted. Yeah, before maybe I will put it there. It's a question from Munir. They always could be slight technical issues, but it's again probably coming to you, Alicia, and it's about the cost of inaction for selected ecosystem services such as biodiversity. What could you share with us?
Yeah, thank you very much, Munir. Great to see you. Great to get your question. Some of the biodiversity-related ecosystem services, like habitat provision, genetic resources, they are integrated in the ecosystem service valuations, yeah, or ecotourism value from other side. So those aspects, they have some value, and we can now attach some monetary price value to them, and they're accounted to some degree in those evaluations. Based on those available data on values of biodiversity related ecosystem services, we can come up actually with the kind of maps that I showed, where land degradation is having a higher negative impact on biodiversity, or where land restoration will improve biodiversity or would lead to more. In Rwanda's case, the biggest trade-off was in wetland areas, because wetlands are very fertile areas for food production, but they are also biodiversity hotspots. And then there was big trade-off, clash, where it should go, to food production or to maintenance biodiversity. So to some extent, based on the available data, we were able, I think, to take into account those biodiversity values, and this could be highlighted by different ecosystems as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you again. I'll give now the floor to Frank Rush.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Well, I would have a question for Mattea. You've been reporting about the indicators which can be used at high level, so high level indicators, and also of global use. And related to that, I would have 3 questions, but I would try to align them. First of all, I would be interested what kind of indicators you are considering for your framework, whether it's plant-based or fauna-based. And when you come to this selection, how you can use these selected indicators across scales. Well, I mean, we are thinking about the globe. A temperate region might have a different diversity than a tropical one. So how comparable are these data then in your framework assessment? And related to this, and Alicia was partially talking about this, do you also have an MRV system or a kind of evaluation system to understand from which level you actually start? So a threshold level to understand how human activities or global change is actually affecting biodiversity, so that your selected indicators are indeed indicating a change.
Thank you so much, Frank. Okay, I'll try to tackle all of these together, but feel free to ask again. So basically, the indicators I was talking about are the indicators that are adopted in the monitoring framework. So in COP15, when the parties adopted the Global Biodiversity Framework, they also adopted the monitoring framework to actually monitor the implementation of the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So these indicators are set, and these are the indicators the party negotiated quite hard and agreed to have it in the monitoring framework and agreed to report on them. So the headline indicators are presented are the ones that the parties adopted to use in the monitoring framework. So we have 26 headline indicators, and for all of these, parties are urged to use them for planning and reporting purposes. For planning, so for their national reports to the CBD in 2026 and 2029, I think, but also for reporting purposes. So we didn't choose the indicator per se. These are the indicators that are officially adopted in the COP decision. We choose the headline indicators just because parties are urged to use them for planning and reporting purposes. All other indicators, such as component, complementary, binary indicators, are optional indicators that parties can use to provide more information to tackle the specific goal and target. So these headline indicators are set, and that's why we are focusing a lot of our projects and initiatives in helping countries actually implement the headline indicators, as this is something parties have to use and agreed and adopted a COP to use. In terms of data, how is data may be connected? So for some headline indicators, for example, such as Red List Index or some of the SDG indicators, some of the finance indicators, the methods are quite there established. There's data flowing, there's institution responsible for the indicators, collecting the data, reporting data. But then we have some indicators, for example, for targets 22, which is on participation on Indigenous people communities, or target on gender inclusivity. So some of the newly set targets, they don't have indicators with a well-established methodology. So it's hard now to have countries say we can actually use this, or we can't use this because there's not a set methodology per se in this part of time. Without saying, for some indicators, for example, if you have data on species distribution, you can use it for multiple headline indicators. And the idea was that some headline indicators would be the same for multiple targets or multiple goals, just to reduce this reporting burden on countries. So the data could be connected. If you have data for Red List Index for goal A, you can also maybe report on target 4 on species extinction rate as well. So this is the idea, that the data would be connected. Saying that, it's hard to say now because a lot of the headline indicators still do not have a methodology. So we're still not sure what type of data we need to collect. But this is something that's progressing the work, and that the technical expert group of indicators set by the COP was working on to actually advise the parties on a national level how to use these indicators. For evaluation system on a threshold level, so basically countries now are using this global framework, but they have to translate it to the national level. So even though it's a headline indicator on a global level, countries will use that and see how they can collect the data on the national level for their national circumstances. So data ideally should be coming from the countries, so they have their own validation system. In case there's not a national institution, as we've seen for some of the indicators, and there's no national data, countries can use global data for the headline indicators, and then maybe use it disaggregated for their own country. Per se saying that, and it makes sense, parties want a validation system. So if they're using global data, they want to validate that data for their country. So this is something also that can be done on a national level. And just as the last point to use, in the COP decision, the monitoring framework, there was a line that says what can be maybe as a starting level. So I think it was 2020, maybe I will need to double check. If parties can use, that will be kind of like a starting year. We can start collecting the data. So in this term, the indicators are set. Complementary indicators keep switching because some of them exist, some of them don't. But the headline indicators are set, and this is what countries adopted in the framework. So that's why we're focusing on these, because we know countries will need to use these specific indicators.
Thanks so much. May I just add a follow-up question on that? So, Mattea, thanks so much for this clarification.
Sorry,
Just a
Frank,
second.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I know there will be opportunity to continue engaging with Matteo. We are running out of time, but if you can put your question in the chat or in the Q&A, then Matteo can address it in the next couple of minutes. So we are running out of time for the Q&A, and we just have the hand of Elisa, which was there. So Elisa, if you can make it in 30 seconds, and either Matteo or Alicia will have 20 seconds or so to answer, that would be great. Then we can conclude.
I believe that she has left the session now.
Okay, then she has donated the time. And sorry, Frank, coming back to you. Now, Frank, you can have 30 seconds for your follow-up question. Frank, if you are still with us.
Now it's better, I think, yeah. So just one question again to the indicators. So that was an important information that you've started now at 2020, as I understood. But this relates to the current status, let's say. But we are living in a global change, and the whole Earth is changing in terms of biodiversity, whatever we do as humans. What kind of targets do you also consider in this framework? Well, I'm sorry, I'm not so much familiar with it, but I would like to hear, well, at which level should we be whenever we consider the headline indicators to say we are on a good track, or it is a business like usual, or the whole situation has become worse? What are the target values you would like to achieve with your assessment? Because that would also relate to farming systems, let's say, where we use indicator systems, and we can only use this when we understand how they react, how they behave, and where there will be within a certain time when we would say, so this is our target of improvement. And the same would be true for a global biodiversity, I would imagine, at least.
Thanks, Frank. Matteo, 30 seconds. Then I will use the remaining 30 seconds. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. I can also pop my email in case I don't have much time. But so the headline indicators reflect the targets which are set for 2030. So we have 23 targets adopted by parties to be achieved by 2030, and we have 4 goals to be achieved by 2050. Saying that, currently countries are updating their biodiversity plans with this framework and with this target set. And at COP16, there will be a consideration of this global analysis of what are countries actually saying they can achieve and what's their plan to achieve these 2030 targets. And then COP17 in 2026, we will have this global review of collective progress, in addition to consideration of global analysis, where after countries submit their 7 national proposals to the CBD, we can actually see what's happening on the ground compared to now what we're planning to do to address these targets and indicators. And then we'll actually see, okay, what is actually happening on the ground in terms of the collective progress to achieve 2030 and 2050 vision. So this is just in 30 seconds, what's from the CBD side, what is considering to be tracking this global review of collective progress, saying that all the countries are adjusting this global framework to their national level. So it will vary across the country significantly based on their needs, based on their set targets, based on their indicators, based on the situation they're currently in. So this is an ideal situation. By 2030, we will achieve all the targets set and adopted. By 2050, we'll achieve the goal and live in harmony with nature. And this is something that CBD through each COP will try to reflect on.
Thank you, Matea. And thanks everyone for being with us. We are running out of time, but it was a great discussion. Once again, Matea and Alicia, really thank you very much for creating the time to share with us your experience and expertise. And we plan to have this kind of webinars on a monthly basis. Our next one will be certainly in June. We are considering the week of June the 10th, and we expect to have the NBSAP forum again to learn about it from UNDP. Then the Agro-Biodiversity Index and the periodic table of food systems from ABC. We invite all of you really to show your interest to be able to contribute to the next subsequent webinars. And this is the idea we have in mind. It is always to pair CGIAR scientists with our external partners so that we can be able to share expertise and experience in some areas. And I think these will be great opportunities for us, especially as we move to the next phase with the mega programs and so on. But it's also a nice opportunity for us to identify areas for engaging with the two COPs, being CBD and CCD, but also other global processes. Matteo referred really to the capacity needs for the NBSAP update and performance assessment. And this is a great opportunity for CGIAR as we talk about the mega programs. With the economics of land degradation with Alistair, it's with the lens of the 3 Rio conventions, I think it's a great opportunity because countries want to hear really what it means in terms of the finance, what it means in terms of economic gain. So these are some of the things that we need to continue the discussions. We are running out of time. Because of that, I can just say thank you very much for being with us today. And we hope to see you during our next webinar in June. And good day or good night, depending on what you are. And bye for now.